Welcome to our heretical journal presentation, Theory of Knowledge. Your presenters are, I'm Daniel Oseko.
And I am Wambazu Thomas.
In our presentation, we'll be presenting the epistemological problems of perception. And I would like Thomas to explain what is epistemological problems of perception.
Epistemological problems of perception. Let us start by defining the term epistemology. The term epistemology is a theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its methods, validity and scope, and the distinction between justified belief and opinion. The philosophical examination of the nature, history, and boundaries of human knowledge is known as epistemology. The phrase is derived from the Greek word episteme, literally known as knowledge, and logos, literally known as reason, which is why the subject is also sometimes called the theory of knowledge. Although many other philosophers have since worked on the subject, Alvin Goldman, one of the philosophers, is frequently credited with the first invention of epistemic existentialism. After defining the term epistemology, now let us know what is perception, since we are dealing with its problems. Here, the term perception is awareness, comprehension, or an understanding of something. And an example of perception is knowing when to try a different technique with a student to increase their learning. Some common synonyms of perception are acumen, discernment, discrimination, insight, and penetration. Perception is the process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting information. This process affects our communication between or because we respond to stimuli differently, whether they are objects or persons, based on how we perceive them. And according to Robbins, perception can be defined as the process by which individuals organize and interpret their sensory impressions to give meaning to their environments. Perception includes the five senses, which is the touch, sight, taste, smell, and sound. As we continue with epistemological problems, starting with the problem of the external world, by first examining the issue of whether our perceptual beliefs are justified or not, the issue of how they are can be handled. The goal of a well-known skeptic argument is to demonstrate that our perceptual assumptions are unjustified. Versions of this argument or group of arguments can be found in Descartes' Meditations, Augustine's Against the Academician, as well as the writings of numerous other ancient and current skeptics. For example, Sextus Empiricus, Miguel de Montaigne. The argument sets up a skeptical scenario in which we perceive things as they would ordinarily appear to us, but in which the views we would naturally acquire are demonstrable and true. To give some typical examples, a person might mistake a vivid dream for waking life. A brain in a container might have the sensory cortices stimulated in such a way that it has the exact same perceptual experiences as I am currently having. Differences in perceivers' sense organs or situation may cause her or him to experience things as a cold that we would experience as hot, or as bitter that we would experience as sweet. Usually, it is not made clear how one arrives to the conclusion that our perceptual beliefs are false. I present one potential reconstruction of the skeptic's case, one that helps to highlight the main issue with perception, epistemology, the skeptical hypothesis, which is dreaming, and here the brains in containers, differently positioned sense organs, etc. Draw our attention to a crucial distinction between appearance and reality. How things perceptually appear is not necessary how they really are. And things could appear the same but really be different, or they could appear in some other incompatible way and actually be the same. Furthermore, consideration of the scenarios leads to the conclusion that even while we or I may know very little, possibly nothing, about how things are in the outside world, I can nevertheless know quite a bit about how they seem to be to me. This leads to a change in perspective from considering perceptual appearances as characteristics of objects. For example, the appearance of the house was quite shabby, to considering them as mental states or experiences of the subject who is perceiving. For example, again, a woman had a visual appearance or experience of a house as being shabby. So finally, it appears that any knowledge we have of the outside world must come to us indirectly, since we or I can only perceive these perceptual images in front of me rather than the world itself. Only in as much as I know and have justified ideas about appearances do I know and have beliefs about the outside world. However, if our main means of communication with the outside world is through the mediation of potentially deceptive perceptual appearances, we should be able to verify that the appearances we are depending on are accurate. Here the problem starts right here and right now, because this seems that impossible to have any proof of the dependability of perception, and that is to say perceptual appearances, without relying on other perceptions. We have actual evidence, for instance, that science is not yet capable of precisely activating brains, but using the evidence to rule out the idea of brain in avert situations seems obviously absurd. The skeptical argument known as Pew is the one which we will refer to as the core of the problem of the external world, is presented in the following. Nothing is ever directly present to the mind in perception except perceptual appearances. Thus, we see that without a good reason for thinking perceptual appearances as veridical, we are not really justified in our perceptual beliefs. We have no good reason for thinking perceptual appearances are veridical, reason claim, and therefore we are not justified in our perceptual beliefs, even though they are inspired by comparable factors, most notably by the indirectness, I think, principle. The problem of the external world should be separated from what is commonly known as the problem of perception. According to the theory that only appearances are ever directly present to the mind, the problem of perception is how perception is feasible. How, for instance, it is possible to see mind-independent objects rather than inferring them from knowledge or seeing experiences. It matters a little for these reasons whether and how such judgments might amount to seeing, because the problem of the eternal world is a fundamental epistemological problem that centers on the normative character of perceptual judgments about external objects. It really concerns if these conclusions can or must be supported. I give the example of a pew. A pew serves as an example of the main issue with the perceptual epistemology. If any of our perceptual beliefs are legitimate, something went wrong with the pew which we use. Then where? In attempting to address this fundamental issue, a number of supplementary issues in the epistemology of perception are raised. So let us go to the second epistemological problem.
The varieties of direct presence, I would like to say, is that the direct presence theorist, whether in the realistic or idealistic school, denies the indirectness principle and maintains that in the case of perceiving a cat, view directly present to and merely there before the mind. But what do these spatial metaphors actually mean? The metaphors can be understood in a number of very distinct ways, each with its own consequences for the rest of you. Before we attempt to grasp direct presence, it is important to note that presence, non-directness, is metaphorically used in this sense. Direct presence means being there, but not because anything else is there. Directness is essentially the absence of mediation, but the type of mediation that is involved depends on the type of presence that is desired. The directness includes phenomenal, the dimension of directness emphasized by Reid notes that perceptual judgments are phenomenally non-inferential, in the sense that they do not result from any discursive or rationalizative process. They are not introspectively based on premises. This non-inferentiality is usually understood closely enough to allow for perceptual beliefs being based on these things other than beliefs, and also to allow for the possibility of unconscious or subpersonal inferential involvement in the formation of perceptual beliefs, so long as the agent is not deliberately basing these perceptual beliefs on other beliefs. Without these two allowances, claims of non-inferentiality would quickly run afoul of standard views in epistemology and psychology, respectively. To claim that perception is phenomenally direct is to claim that it is non-inferential in the sense. Referential directness, which is another way that perception might be direct, is if perception represents external objects. As such, without the presentation being
mediated by the representation of other things. Contrast this with the classical empiricists' opposing view that the only way to represent external objects is as the cause of our sensations. One might worry, however, that unless perception puts objects directly before us, we are in danger of not genuinely being able to think about the objects, hear external world at all, but only about ourselves. To say that perception is referentially direct is to say that the ability of perceptual states to represent does not depend on the ability of other states to represent. Perceptual directness is one version of indirectness that claims that we perceive outer things by perceiving inner things, usually sense data. This makes it sound as if what we thought was ordinary direct perceiving of tables and rocks and such is really more like perceiving that someone has broken into your house indirectly, on the basis of actually perceiving the broken window, an empty area where the TV used to be, etc. It is easy to see how saying to claim that perception of external object is perceptually direct is to claim that it is not mediated by the perception of something else. So let us continue with idealism and phenomenalism, and Daniel will put us into that.
Idealism and phenomenalism are two philosophical positions that contend that everyday objects like tables, clouds, and rocks are actually composites of several conceivable mind states, particularly perceptual ones. There are various types of idealism and various reasons why people hold the perspective. I won't try to differentiate between phenomenalism and idealism. Instead, I use the term idealism to refer to both. However, one reason is that it claims to address the skepticism issue of the outside world. According to Beck, idealism can combat skepticism by separating the phenomenal objects of perception, which are collections of appearances and about which we might know something, from the numeral objects, which are things in themselves and not mere appearances. Transcendental idealism. When we talk about transcendental idealism, attempts to reconcile itself with the skeptic by challenging the indirectness principle. Idealism may help to resolve the skeptical issue, and also will prevent skepticism by simply bridging the gap between the proximal and the distal objects of perceptual experience if the problem with the outside world begins there, by maintaining that the world is ultimately mental and that, for example, tables are simply collections of ideas. The idealist can welcome direct world engagement while maintaining the assertion that nothing is ever directly present to the mind but its own mental states. The indirectness principle is typically the target of metaphysical responses, but idealism also provides an answer to view by challenging the reason claim, without first observing a consistent correlation between external objects and experiences. According to Jung, we can't have any reason to believe that external objects are the principal causes for our experiences. However, we can only observe external objects if we can credibly pose them as plausible causes of our experiences. On the other hand, if the perceptual objects aren't after all external, we are better able to reduce the causal links between them and the particular experiences. So, Thomas could tell us more about epistemological solutions.
The epistemological solutions. One or more views, clearly epistemological premises are refuted by epistemological responses. In order to place that denial within a large epistemological or perception and a bigger epistemological more generally, they attempt to make it credible. So let us look at classical nationalism. According to fundamentalism, some views are epistemologically fundamental, meaning that their justification is independent of other beliefs' empirical backing, and all other beliefs ultimately get their justification from fundamental beliefs. Classical fundamentalism holds that it is appearance beliefs, that is, beliefs about perceptual appearances, that are basic, and that perceptual justification necessitates that we have good reason to believe that the relevant current appearances are veridical. Basically, justified beliefs are also sometimes referred to as immediately justified or directly justified, although some theories can claim that the connection is only satisfied when inference takes place. Basing is an epistemic dependent relation and does not need explicit inference. By rejecting the reasons, claim and arguing that we frequently have valid, non-viciously circular reasons for believing that our experiences are true, the classical nationalists avoid skepticism. The nature and justification of appearances views as well as the purportedly non-circular inference from appearance beliefs to perceptual beliefs are the two issues that this raises for classical foundationalization. So let us again talk about fundamental epistemic principles, if I'm not really mistaken about talking about what I just explained. And this, Daniel will help us with it.
Fundamental epistemic principles in response to view some fundamentalists have refuted the meta-evidential principle. The majority of these viewpoints have disregarded both faiths of the common defense of the meta-evidential principle. But there is one significant exception that deserves attention. It occurs with the classical fundamentalists that appearances belief serve as the foundation for perceptual belief, but it disputes the requirement for an explanation to support the validity of the appearances reality connection. According to Chisholm, a key epistemological tenet is that if one is justified in thinking that she is perceived to be P, then one is initially justified in thinking that P. By arguing that this concept is basic, one is disputing that the legitimacy of the transition from P appearance to P reality is based on deduction or abduction, and affirming the legitimacy of that transition from P appearance to P reality. The classical fundamentalist views this action as improper, although it provides the desired result that perceptual beliefs are justified. It doesn't explain how this is possible or provide any evidence that this is the case. The argument asserts that the postulation of fundamental epistemic principle, which permits us to draw whatever conclusion we like despite our incapacity to support them with evidence, has all the benefits of steering over honest labor, to use Bertrand Russell, his excellent expression. So Thomas will tell us more about coherentism.
Similar to the classical foundationalists, the coherentists supports the meta-evidential principle but maintains that there are valid arguments for the accuracy of perception. And according to coherentism, rather than going all the way back to fundamental beliefs, at least some justification can be found in the mutual support of other unsubstantiated views can say therefore is coherentists are sometimes accused of endorsing particular circular. They prefer to call them holistic, and these are arguments, but coherentists will deny the reason claimed by maintaining that our arguments for the dependability of perception are not really viciously circular. Here, coherentism can tolerate empirical defenses of the veracity of perception, since it permits mutual support, which is a theory permits reference to past performances, evolutions, and other scientific proof, in order to defend rather than merely postulate the epistemic legitimacy of perception and satisfy the internalist requirement that the relevant factors for a belief justification be internal to the agent. Coherentism and classical foundationalism make an effort to satisfy the meta-evidential principle. Externalist versions do but not. Internalist moderate foundationalization does B but not A. Here, although it is possible to defend an externalist epistemology that is otherwise structural, similar to classic foundationalism or coherentism, existing externalist theories have allowed or have followed modalist foundationalization in allowing beliefs about external objects and properties to be epistemologically basic. And as we continue with this presentation, we would like to really say that we have come to the end of our presentation, and we will end with a conclusion. And this conclusion, Daniel will tell us this epistemological problem in perception in a detailed way as we conclude our journal.
In particular, the failure of perception, as we conclude, implied by a well-known metaphysics of perceptions which threaten to inexorably lead to skepticism, has long been the focus of the epistemological issues of perceptions. Although some epistemological theories and some metaphysical theories of experience have natural affinities, the two learn to be logically independent. Even after establishing our metaphysics, we will still need to make challenging choices on the epistemology. There are numerous non-direct realist and direct realist epistemological theories of perceptions, each with their own advantages and challenges that need to be overcome. And that's our presentation. I think that's our conclusion. And thank you for your cooperation and being good listeners. I'm your presenter, Daniel.
And I am Thomas.